Winter came to the Eastern Front like a living curse. What had begun as Hitler's promise of a swift victory now turned into a white, frozen nightmare. By December 1942, temperatures dropped below -40. Engines refused to start. Rifles jammed in the cold. Flesh froze to metal. And the once unstoppable Wehrmacht, the pride of the German war machine, found itself trapped in a land that devoured men faster than bullets ever could. Soldiers who had marched across Europe with confidence now struggled just to survive another night. Their greatcoats were too thin, their boots cracked and stiff with ice. Rations arrived late, when they arrived at all. Men melted snow to drink, burned books and wooden planks to keep warm, and wrapped their feet in newspaper to stop the frostbite. The ground was hard as stone, yet soaked with blood. The Soviets, hardened by their own history of suffering, fought like ghosts in the snow. They moved silently through blizzards, blending with the white landscape, striking with ruthless precision. To the Germans, it felt as if the very land itself had turned against them, an endless, frozen enemy that offered no mercy. In diary entries, Wehrmacht soldiers wrote not of conquest, but of despair. One noted, "The cold is our greatest foe. The Russians are merely its servants." Another confessed, "We no longer fight for victory. We fight to stay alive until morning." The front lines blurred beneath the snowdrifts, entire units vanished without a sound, swallowed by the storm. The mighty machinery of war, tanks, trucks, artillery, stood silent, frozen monuments to human arrogance. The German advance had stopped, and the Eastern Front became a graveyard of steel and bone. For every fire that flickered in the darkness, 100 more went out forever. Winter 1942 was not just a season. It was judgment, cold, merciless, and absolute. In the vast silence of the Eastern Front, words became the only warmth left to men who had forgotten what warmth felt like. The official report spoke of advances, objectives, and enemy losses, but the diaries and letters told the truth. The truth of hunger, exhaustion, fear, and doubt. The truth of men slowly realizing they were fighting not for victory, but for survival in a land that had already decided their fate. They wrote by candlelight, their fingers numb, the ink freezing in the pen. Some scratched their thoughts onto scraps of paper, ration wrappers, or the backs of old maps. Most knew their words might never reach home. But still, they wrote, to mothers, to wives, to lovers they might never see again. One letter, found in the ruins near Stalingrad, read, "Dearest Anna, we no longer fight for glory. We fight against the snow, the hunger, and the darkness. Every night I dream of our kitchen, the smell of bread, the sound of your laughter. Here, there is only silence, the kind that makes you forget you are still alive." Another soldier wrote in his field diary, "The cold is unbearable. The men have stopped talking. Some stare at nothing for hours. Yesterday, Müller froze to death in his foxhole. He was only 19. We buried him in the snow, but by morning, the wind had taken him. It's as if the earth itself refuses to keep us." These were not soldiers of propaganda posters anymore. They were ghosts in grey uniforms, clinging to fragments of humanity. Their letters became confessions, not of courage, but of helplessness. "We were told the Russians would collapse," one entry reads. But they do not collapse. They come again and again, and when we kill one, 10 more take his place. They fight like men who have nowhere left to go. Maybe that's why they win. Censorship tried to silence such words. Letters too honest were seized, destroyed, or rewritten by army clerks to keep morale from breaking. But truth has a way of surviving. Smuggled notes, hidden pages, and forgotten diaries later revealed what no speech or order could admit, that the Wehrmacht, so proud and disciplined, was bleeding not just from bullets, but from the inside out. Some men confessed their guilt. One wrote, "We were told to burn the village. The partisans had been here," they said. "Women screamed, children cried, and still we burned. When it was done, I could not look at my own hands. How can I return home with these hands? Others clung to faith, praying not for victory, but for forgiveness. "If I die here," one letter ends, "tell my son that his father was not a hero. Tell him only that he was afraid, and that he tried to do what was right." There were also words of bitter defiance. "The Führer says we will triumph," a soldier scrawled in December 42. But what does he know of this cold? What does he know of digging graves in frozen earth with bare hands? Let him come here, just for one night. By the time the war turned against Germany, the letters grew shorter. Some were no more than a line, "still alive," or "Witz knowing again." Others stopped mid-sentence, the ink fading into nothing. Many never left the front at all, buried with the men who wrote them, sealed forever under snow and rubble. When historians later opened these diaries, they didn't just find accounts of war, they found fragments of lost humanity. The words were raw, trembling, painfully honest. They revealed that beneath the iron discipline and the propaganda machine, the soldiers were still men, frightened, homesick, and trapped in a nightmare of their own making. Each letter was a cry through time, a whisper from the frozen past. They remind us that wars are not only fought with bullets and orders, but with memories, regrets, and the desperate hope that someone, somewhere, will remember who you were. And in those fragile pages, stained with dirt and blood, the voices of the Wehrmacht still echo, are not as conquerors, not as monsters, but as men caught between duty and despair, writing their final words into the endless snow. Life on the Eastern Front was not measured in days, but in moments of endurance. Hunger, fear, and exhaustion became constants, silent companions that never left a soldier's side. The Wehrmacht had marched east with confidence and discipline, yet by the winter of 1942, all that remained was survival. Food was a fantasy. Supply lines stretched thin across the frozen wilderness, and rations grew smaller each week. A slice of bread became treasure, a single can of meat something worth fighting over. Soldiers boiled snow for water, scraped frost from tent walls, and ate whatever they could find, frozen potatoes, horse meat, even leather from their own gear. In diaries, some confessed to stealing from the dead, not out of greed, but out of the raw instinct to stay alive one more day. Hunger hollowed their faces, but fear hollowed their souls. Every sunrise could bring an artillery strike, every footstep in the dark could mean an ambush. The front was unpredictable, one moment silent, the next exploding with death. Men slept with their rifles, not for protection, but for comfort. It was the only thing that felt certain anymore. Night was the worst. The cold crept in like an invisible predator. Frostbite turned fingers black. The moans of wounded men echoed across the fields until they were swallowed by the wind. Soldiers wrapped themselves in whatever they could find, blankets, rags, even enemy uniforms. They burned anything that would catch fire, books, crates, their own boots if it came to it. And still, the cold won. Amid this suffering, something unexpected grew, a bond stronger than any order or ideology, brotherhood. It wasn't about loyalty to the Reich or the Führer. It was loyalty to the man beside you, the one sharing his last crust of bread, the one who pulled you from the snow when you could no longer walk. In the chaos of war, these small acts of humanity became sacred. A soldier from the 6th Army wrote, "We no longer fight for Germany. We fight for each other." For Schmidt, who hasn't eaten in 2 days. For Weber, who still believes he'll see his wife again. For the few of us who still remember what laughter sounds like. Laughter, rare as it was, became a lifeline. Men joked about their misery, mocked the cold, and gave nicknames to their lice as if humor could keep despair away. Sometimes, they sang old songs from home, their cracked voices trembling in the icy air. For a few brief minutes, they weren't soldiers anymore. They were just men, young, scared, and dreaming of warm rooms and familiar faces. But brotherhood came with pain. When a comrade fell, there was no time for mourning. Sometimes, there was no time for burial. The living would take the dead man's boots, his gloves, his ammunition, anything that might help someone else survive. One soldier wrote, "We promise the fallen we'll tell their families." But deep down, we know we won't. We can't even remember our own names sometimes. As the months dragged on, hunger and fear became part of the rhythm of existence. The men stopped asking when the war would end. They stopped believing in victory. They only hoped the next shell wouldn't have their name on it. Yet, within that hopelessness, they found something almost pure, a stripped-down version of humanity built on shared suffering. There was no rank in a frozen trench, no politics when the rations ran out. Only men, holding on to each other, refusing to vanish into the snow. One letter captured it best: the world thinks we are wolves, but we are only men trying to stay alive. When this is over, if I live, I will never again be afraid of anything, except forgetting the faces of those who saved me. The Eastern Front had destroyed nearly everything: armies, cities, illusions. But in the ruins, it revealed what war cannot completely kill: the fragile, stubborn light of brotherhood. It was the only warmth left in a land of ice and death, and for many, it was the last thing that made them feel human. By the winter of 1942–43, the proud Sixth Army, once the spearhead of Hitler's drive into the Soviet Union, had become a ghost of itself. Encircled within the ruins of Stalingrad, more than 250,000 German soldiers found themselves trapped in a frozen hell with no way out. What began as a campaign of conquest now became a desperate fight for survival, not against the Red Army alone, but against starvation, frost, and hopelessness. The city that Hitler had ordered them to capture at any cost was now their tomb. Stalingrad, once a smoking ruin under their bombardment, turned into a fortress for the Soviets and a graveyard for the invaders. The Volga River froze solid, and the streets were buried under snow and debris. Every building was a battlefield, every cellar a shelter for the dying. When the Soviets launched Operation Uranus in November 1942, the trap was sprung. The Red Army encircled Stalingrad in a massive pincer movement, cutting off the Sixth Army from all supplies. Within days, the hunters became the hunted. German soldiers, who had once advanced across thousands of miles, were now encased in a steel ring that tightened with every passing hour. At first, there was disbelief. Hitler had promised that no German soldier would be abandoned. Relief will come, they told each other. The Führer will not leave us here. But as weeks turned to months, the truth became impossible to ignore. The promised relief, Field Marshal Manstein's Operation Winter Storm, came too late and too weak. The Luftwaffe's attempt to supply the pocket from the air was a cruel illusion. Planes dropped too little, too late, and often in the wrong places. A few tins of meat, a sack of bread, maybe a handful of ammunition, never enough to sustain an army starving in the cold. Temperatures plunged below -30 degrees. Frostbite crippled men faster than bullets. Horses were slaughtered and eaten. When they were gone, the men boiled belts, sawdust, and soup made from wallpaper paste. In some units, soldiers tore pages from books not to read them, but to burn them for a few minutes of warmth. Letters from the pocket revealed the growing despair. One soldier wrote, "We no longer think of victory or home. Only of bread, a fire, and an end to this misery." Another recorded in his diary, "The snow hides the bodies. When it melts, we will see how many we have truly lost." Command collapsed as quickly as morale. General Friedrich Paulus, the Sixth Army's commander, followed orders to the letter, even when those orders led to ruin. Hitler forbade retreat, insisting that the army hold Stalingrad to the last man and the last bullet. To disobey meant treason. Paulus hesitated, torn between duty and the lives of his men. When offered the chance to surrender early, he refused, still clinging to the hope of relief that would never come. By January 1943, the Sixth Army was dying on its feet. Thousands lay wounded in makeshift hospitals, without medicine, heat, or food. Doctors operated with knives heated over candles, without anesthesia. The dead froze where they fell, their bodies stacked like walls against the wind. Ammunition ran out. So did hope. On January 31st, Paulus finally surrendered his southern pocket. 2 days later, the northern group followed. Hitler was furious. He had promoted Paulus to Field Marshal the day before, hoping he would choose suicide over capture. But Paulus, broken and numb, saw no point in dying for a lost cause. Of the 250,000 soldiers who had entered the Stalingrad pocket, fewer than 90,000 survived to become prisoners. Most of them would never return home, as starvation, disease, and exhaustion would claim them in Soviet camps. The surrender of the Sixth Army was more than a military disaster, it was the psychological breaking point of the German war machine. For the first time, the myth of invincibility shattered. Across Europe, families received the dreaded letters stamped as missing in action, Eastern Front. For the men who had endured it, Stalingrad was not just defeat, it was revelation. The belief in Hitler's destiny, in endless victory, froze and crumbled with them in the snow. One survivor later wrote, "We went into Stalingrad as soldiers of an empire. We came out, those few who lived, as shadows of men, stripped of everything but the memory of hunger and the faces of the dead." The collapse of the Sixth Army marked the turning of the tide in the East. From that moment on, Germany was on the defensive. The Red Army, blooded but unbroken, would now push westward, across the same frozen lands, through the ruins of cities once conquered, until the war itself came back to the heart of the Reich. Stalingrad had devoured an army, but it had also devoured an illusion. The dream of domination ended there, in the snow and rubble beside the Volga, where the ghosts of the Sixth Army still whisper through the wind, a warning of hubris and the terrible cost of obedience. "We thought we'd go home for Christmas," one soldier wrote in his diary, a final line, frozen in time. That hope, once so simple and human, had long since turned to ash. For the men of the Eastern Front, home had become a memory, fading like smoke over the snow. Those who survived the inferno of Stalingrad would spend years in Soviet camps, working in mines, rebuilding the same cities they once destroyed. Many never returned. For their families, there were no bodies to bury, no graves to visit, only silence. A generation of German soldiers vanished into the white emptiness of Russia, swallowed by history itself. But within their letters and diaries, their voices still speak. They speak not of glory, but of exhaustion, not of victory, but of regret. "We believed we were fighting for our country," one wrote, "but in the end, we were only fighting to survive." The words carry no hatred, only weariness. In them lies the haunting realization that every empire built on conquest is destined to collapse under its own weight. The Eastern Front was more than a battlefield, it was a mirror reflecting the depths of human suffering. Millions perished, soldiers and civilians alike, caught between ideologies that devoured lives with mechanical precision. The frozen fields of Stalingrad, Kursk, and Smolensk remained silent witnesses to what war truly costs when pride blinds men to compassion. Those who returned came back changed, not as heroes, but as ghosts. They spoke little of what they had seen. Their eyes told the stories their tongues could not. For them, victory and defeat were meaningless words. Only survival mattered. Today, the ruins of Stalingrad, now Volgograd, stand rebuilt, alive, defiant. Yet beneath the modern city lies a graveyard without borders. The bones of the Sixth Army rest alongside those of the Red Army, their enemies in life, their equals in death. The soldiers who once dreamed of going home never did. But in a way, their words, their confessions, their pain did return home to us. They remind us that behind every flag, every order, every headline, there are men, frightened, cold, and longing for peace. "We thought we'd go home," he wrote. And perhaps, in remembering them, in hearing their voices across time, we finally bring them home after all.